Hey, and welcome back to Frankly Speaking, in conjunction with Mehi Rain. As my special guest here tonight is Julian DeMarco. How you doing, Julian?
I'm doing great. Little hot, little sweaty because it's really humid over here in the east, but
All right.
pushing through.
All right. Well, good, good, good. Well, listen, Julian got a hold of me today, and he said he wanted to talk about voting, the whole concept of voting, and what it's meant for Catholics, and really what it's meant for Americans as well too. There's certain things here on YouTube we can't really talk about, such as previous elections and things like that. But I think a lot of us, Julian, are starting to sense that there's a problem with the system itself, democracy, republicanism, call it what you want. There's a lot of people really feel disenfranchised. And when I say disenfranchised, they're voting. And yet there's other issues involved that makes them feel disenfranchised, right? We have a country where we're at each other's throats. We have no common values, no common culture, no common manners anymore at this point in history. And yet, we're always told every 2 and 4 years, you got to get their vote. You got to get their vote. And if you lose, you got to vote even harder, Julian. What are your thoughts about American democracy and the right of the individual to voice his opinion?
I think one of the things that has come out, especially during all of this chaos of the last year and the last election, I think people are waking up to the fact that local elections really do matter. Because with all these, it's not the federal government, although there is lots of problems with the federal government, and we'll touch on that. But it's not the federal government that is forcing all these lockdowns, the mask wearing, and all these vaccines. It's the local government. People are now waking up and saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that the local government had all this authority. Because for all of my life that I can actively remember, so I'm 31, so that's a good chunk of time, I think. And even before, just looking through histories, are the whole the whole lens of politics has been about Washington, D.C. And so we just keep voting and voting and voting in all these national elections and forgetting about the local elections and really honestly the authority that the local government has, even though all the government has a government and authority and every other, the media focus and everything has focused to the national, and the local governments have ceded so much power to the federal government. They still do carry a lot of weight, and it's this issue that I think is one of the problems, is that people say vote harder. Okay, vote harder how? What do you mean vote harder? Because if you're going to not really care about the local election, but vote in the national election where it touches you less, where your congressman, who you probably don't even know, your mayor, who you probably know more than you probably know your congressman or your senator, what is this voting going to do when you're not paying attention to the local people that have immediate direct authority over you, and you're worrying about Washington, D.C., when if you have a problem with Washington, D.C., then you should concern yourself more with what's going on the local scale. Because when the directives come down from Washington, D.C., you have a stopgap with your local officials if there's something that you don't like, because your local officials still do have a good deal of authority, because we are a union of 50 states, a union of 50 individual countries with a national constitution, and each state has its own state constitution. And I think people forget that, but that really is the problem with voting, I think, that most people have failed to realize. But there's even problems voting on a national, on a not a national, excuse me, just a regular local elections as well. There's voting all around, but I think that that's important, that there needs to be an emphasis, if we're going to keep this system that we have, although I don't think it's long for this world, then you need to focus more on your immediate area and less about Washington, D.C. But
well, I think one of the reasons why people focus on the national elections more than local is because the national, or should I say, the federal government has been growing by leaps and bounds over the past, well, since the founding of the country, let's be honest here.
Well,
And
it really started, sorry, it really started under Lincoln, but that's close to the founding.
You're right. You're right. Lincoln, put in a bunch of measures during, especially the Civil War, that grew the powers of the government. But I think, we've been on steroids now probably since FDR, I would say.
Oh, definitely.
As far, growing the government. And that's where all the power has been. I mean, you take something like Obamacare that affected all local communities, including in the rural communities. Obamacare really washes the hands of local communities to do anything effectively to help people out with what has been skyrocketing healthcare costs. I know where I live in my region right now, we have some good plans before Obamacare. After Obamacare, everything went up. All of our rates, all of our premiums, all of our deductibles, it all tripled in totality. And when you go and complain about these things, say this is outrageous for smaller sort of middle-class communities, they tell you, well, hey, that's Obamacare. That's a national policy. And I think that's why so many people focus on national politics now, right? You talk about something like abortion that a lot of Catholics and Christians care about, Julian. Really, what we do at the local level doesn't matter in that respect because guess what? The Supreme Court has ruled on it. So many decisions, so many, not only cultural decisions, but so many seminal decisions that affect everybody. And I think it's taken the emphasis off the local community. Sure, local communities may deal with zoning issues and how much growth they want, how many home builders, how many stores come into town. But really, those issues that we all care about, that we're all at each other's throats, those all come down from the federal government. I believe as the government has grown, the emphasis by Americans has become to continue to focus on the national elections, Julia.
Yeah, I just to talk about that abortion part just for a tiny bit. You're right. The abortion is such on a national level. So I'm always asking this question to Catholics or pro-lifers or any sane person who says, killing a baby is just, that's insane. Well, what are we going to do if by a miracle Roe v. Wade gets overturned? Because if it goes back to the states, well, California, it's going to be like Roe v. Wade never was overturned. New York, it's like Roe v. Wade was never overturned. There are so many states that are just going to be business as usual. Oh, well, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Whatever. Keep killing babies. You have to focus on, this is a multi-tiered level on the abortion, I think. You have to focus on your local levels, and yes, on the national as well. But there has to be, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that's still a huge chunk of states, over 25 states, that abortion is going to be as normal. So you have to fight those battles too, while also fighting the overarching battle. Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. There's the Great War, and then there is the war. The Great War, in my view, is the individual battles of what state is going to be for or against abortion. That's the Great War. Because you have to make sure once the war, which is Roe v. Wade, is won, that the Great War that's going on is already over. That all 50 states are unanimous that abortion is abhorrent and is illegal. Then once you win the war, meaning a Roe v. Wade is overturned, then the job is done. Because if you win the war, but you're still fighting the Great War of all these individual battles, then it doesn't really mean much to turn Roe v. Wade over, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think abortion is complicated, and it goes back to really the central problem of America and why we have so many issues and why we're at each other's throats, and that is as I said so many times before, we have no moral arbiter of truth. We had a separation of church and state at the foundation of the nation. We've talked about sort of the, sort of the pluralistic sort of religious beliefs of the founding fathers, and by them opting out of a centralized sort of theological standard to build a culture off, that's kind of left every individual to determine their own personal moral codes, and that's a problem, right? Because, like you said, if we overturn Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court, whatever it is, it just goes down to the state levels. Then you got to divide between blue and red states, and then what do we do at that point, right? Do we say, here we are, we're these great Americans, we're the greatest nation in the history of the world because we brought freedom and prosperity and money and technological innovation to the whole world, and here I am in Utah, we've banned abortion, but in California, they're murdering fellow Catholics in the womb left and right. Does that make us a good nation or a bad nation? Well, what it makes us is this nation that doesn't have any true moral principles at the foundation of the nation itself. And that's why the blue states will be allowed to kill at will. You say, you talk about, Julian, going down to the local levels. I agree with you. Local democracy is probably the one area that I can agree upon when we talk about democracy. But at the end of the day, a state like California, it is so utterly corrupt. The political system is so utterly corrupt that they're going to be killing babies over there from here to kingdom come, or unless Christ himself and God strikes down a chastisement. They're not going to stop killing babies in that state.
Don't talk to me about California. That's a hot mess. but you're right, though. You're right. But no, like, California is a hot mess. I mean, because I've never been to California in waking memory. The last time I was there, I was a small child, so I have very little memory of it. Yeah. But California, it's a whole nother country over there. It really is a whole nother country.
It's a foreign country.
It's a foreign country. I mean, the mentality, everything about it. I mean, like Charles says, California is it has all these problems, but you're at the beach playing volleyball in January with your shirt off, and you're like, oh, it's January.
That's right.
But yeah. It has all these problems, though. Why should you be in Utah when Roe v. Wade is overturned and abortion is illegal, but the state over right next to you, it's babies being killed by the thousands a day? Yeah. It's just, and we're supposed to be a country and a unified country. I'm not for that. I'm not for California killing babies, just like people in California aren't for people in Utah, even though I'm not in Utah, but I'm just giving the example. If I was, if I was in Utah and abortion was illegal, they would be not for me being okay for abortion being illegal in Utah. So there is no uniformity in the way that this country is set up. And it's shown in the voting as well, which is a problem because you literally have people in California, that's a whole nother country, a foreign country. You have New York, that's essentially basically a sister country of California without the good weather, politically speaking, and it's right next to me. I'm in Pennsylvania. It's the state right next to me. I mean, it's just, there is no uniformity from one area to the next, and you have these 50 states, 50 individual states with 50 governors, 50 different constitutions with an overarching, reaching general constitution. And to me, it doesn't seem viable. And it seems like there's so many mental gymnastics that you have to make to say that this system works. When California constantly, it has like this huge electoral, electoral votes. Was forgetting my mind for a second. And then they constantly always vote Democrat. I mean, if they do vote for a Republican governor, like the Terminator, they're normally a moderate governor, normally a moderate conservative. If basically a conservative light.
Or they turn altogether to the left, like Schwarzenegger did. Actually, he
or
turned
that,
hard to the left once he was
or
in
like,
office. The
or like
first few
that.
pieces of legislation he tried to pass, he got smacked around by the legislature, and then he turned tail and became a leftist when he was governing there. And if you ever listen to Schwarzenegger today, he's a far leftist. You would never know that he was a Republican.
You'd never know he was a Republican. I mean, I don't follow his career, but every single time, but anytime I hear a little bit of news about him,
Yeah.
I'm like, you'd never know he was a Republican governor.
Mm-hmm.
You'd never know. And it's stuff like that. I mean, like now they're trying to get rid of, I'm not sure, I haven't really been following up on this, but now they're trying to get rid of the Electoral College because they want states like California and New York to dictate who's going to be president for the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Because everybody in that state just votes blue.
Well, and there's a lots of corruptions in that state. Listen, I'm talking. Listen, I was born and raised in California, LA, and I'm talking to my friends out in California about this recall election of Gavin Newsom right now. And listen, everybody wants Newsom out. He screwed it up badly over there. They're calling him a tyrant over there. But the problem is that it's mail-in ballots again, which is ripe for corruption. I mean, we've had third world countries ban the concept of mail-in ballots because people can print these things out at home. So, I mean, listen, I'm not holding my breath that Newsom is going to be out, even though there may be, again, the will of the people may want him out. That's a problem, Julian.
Yeah, that is a problem. I mean, when third world countries ban mail-in ballots, again, as I stated previously before, privately and on record, you know, when third world dictators have better discretion when it comes stuffing the ballot box, but America outright does it in your face, you know there's a problem.
Yeah, I know, and that's one of the things. But Julian, let's talk about the general concept of voting. I mean, you know, one of the great, I guess, traditions and histories of America that we take pride in is the concept, of course, of representative government, right? It's one of the claims of the early colonials that the old monarch in England was not representing the people weren't representative. The idea of electing representatives, whether it's in the House of Representatives or even the Senate. Well, the Senate's a little different historically. It used to be decided different, not by a popular vote, but at the very least, direct democracy by electing the representative of your district. And it's always been interesting to me because I'm almost 50 years old. I'll be 50 years old in October, and yet I don't remember one candidate in my lifetime that ever represented my values, Julian. I mean, it seems to me like the concept of representative government is a myth.
Well, it is a myth. Just like you, I've never seen anybody in my short lifetime of being able to legally vote or not legally vote, I've seen anybody that represent my values or concerns or beliefs or anything like that, because it's a myth. No one person in a participatory right-left multi-party system is going to represent your values, because you can't, because we live in because republicanism by definition is pluralistic.
Yeah.
You cannot have uniformity with pluralism. You just can't. It's impossible. It's an oxymoron.
It's about factions. It's about who can collaborate, the strongest factions, and that could be money influence, that could be power, that could be name influence, that could be intimidation, that could be corporations, that could be the influence of the media. It's whoever puts together the strongest factions usually wins, Julian.
Well, yeah, of course, that's the name of the game. It's who's the strongest at the trough that bulldozes his way to get to where he's at.
Yeah.
It's the proletariat always has a issue with people who are of status, of pedigree? Why is this person in a position of authority when they did nothing to get to that position? I'm smarter, I'm more intelligent, I'm stronger, I'm this, I'm that. And therefore, I don't like this person because this person was born into power and I wasn't, and I should be better. Which, since this person was born into power and has a pedigree and did nothing to deserve it other than being born, in my mind, as a Christian, that leaves a lot, not just a little bit, but a lot of room for humility, which is a Christian virtue. Because you are in this position by no virtue other than that God allowed you to be born to this position.
Yeah.
But we don't understand duty, we don't understand humility, we don't understand tradition, we don't understand any of these things and how valuable they are to a functioning, well-ordered society.
Yeah. But what about the idea of, I don't want to be ruled by anybody, Julian. I'm an autonomous individual. Kiss my rear end. I'm an American. I get to decide my own future. Nobody tells me how to live my life. Freedom, baby. Yeah.
Well, but somebody is always telling somebody else what to do. You cannot. That's like, it's just like, well, let me put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
High school kids, you wouldn't want your son going to a high school where the high school kids tell the principal how to run the high school. Because that's insane.
Yeah.
The principal who runs the high school presumably knows what he's doing. He doesn't consult the students on what needs done because he's the boss. Just like a CEO of a country, he consults his board. Let's think of that as his counselors and ministers that advise him on what things to do. But at the end of the day, the CEO is the one making the decisions. He's not asking the grunt how to run the company. It's insane. You can't get 51% of the population when you have the other percent who doesn't agree with the decision. And we all know that we don't live in a country where every man, woman, and child has to vote. Voting is voluntary at this point in time, although I feel like that's not long for this world either. Because if the leftists have their way, they want everybody to vote so they can get what they want. But majority of people don't vote in this country. And so how is that 51% of the majority?
Yeah.
But that's not. That's insane. And here's a little tidbit. It's from an article that I read a long time ago, which really summed up the voting booth. And it says, the sacrament of democracy, with minor exceptions, democracy takes place in the sacred space of the voting booth, which resembles nothing so much as the Catholic confessional. And indeed, this is the place where the voter alone and isolated confesses his true religion. It is perhaps the highest expression of the individualistic philosophy of modern man. But surely it is not the only form of democracy. There are deliberative forms, the caucus, the town meeting, the group assembly. The major difference is that the voting in these systems is public, and a space is allowed for deliberation and public persuasion. It is true that any group can be as irrational or more so than isolated individuals. Nevertheless, in a group, there is always the possibility that a persons of reasons and temperance trained in the arts of rhetoric will be able to persuade their fellow citizens to a reasonable course of action and overcome the natural tendency of democracy to passion and irrationality. To sum that up, the voting booth is where we profess our true individuality because we don't know what people are doing in that voting booth. When I go to confession, nobody outside of confession, save alone myself and God, know what I'm confessing in there. When somebody goes to the voting booth, you can say you're voting for this person, but do I truly know? I don't.
No.
Even if you tell me that this is who you voted for, I'm going to have to take it on your word. I'm just going to have to believe it. But at the end of the day, I really don't know. And because democracy relies itself on passions, it relies itself on irrationality. Democracy works. It is born and bred on passions and irrationality. Because that's why you see these politicians, they never talk about rhetoric. It's all about passions and irrationality. Be mad, be upset. We need revolutions, rage, cause a problem, cause a scene. What was Maxine Waters screaming about when Trump was in office? We're going to impeach him. We're going to basically she was basically stirring violence. That's what democracy is. It is passion. It's not logic. It's not rational. It's all about the passions. If you listen to these politicians, it's not about facts. It's not about logic. It's not about any of these things. It's about persuasion, manipulation, and most importantly, passions, human emotions, which, when laid bare and unchecked, gives you the society we have today.
That's interesting, Julian, because as I study history, post Enlightenment, we really had two movements. We had a Bolshevik movement out in the Far East, and then we had more what we consider a classical liberal movement out in the West. And I think because we got caught up in the 70-year Cold War and we characterized the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc as a bunch of tyrannical tyrants, we came to the conclusion that democracy in and of itself is good because it stands up against tyrannical governments, right? We did away with the monarchs of the old Catholic world and I guess the monarchs of the Protestants, though that's a little bit different in my opinion. And so democracy is what stood in the way of tyrants because the people could rise up at any time. But the more you study history, Julian, the more what you see is far left governments actually don't turn to tyranny as often as they do to democracy. Actually, sure, you still have some of that over in China with a one-party rule, a communist party over there. You had it in Cuba for a while. You had it in the Soviet Union. But for the most part, that's broken down. And the preferred method for governance, for leading the West, really, and really the whole globe to sort of this Marxist paradigm, has been democracy. It's like I asked a friend of mine a while back, name me one republic post-Enlightenment that hasn't turned communist after so many years. I mean, there's not one that has withstood the test of time, the purity to remain, if you want to call it that, classical liberal camp. You look at Italy, Spain, England, America, all of them, they've turned all far left, which tells me, Julian, and I think it's pretty clear evidence at this point, that democracy is actually the modern preference for far left Marxists to dominate society.
Well, it is. All tyrants, all these liberal communist systems, what have you, even republics, even our very own in France, which is on its fifth republic because they like them so much, all have come about by violence, passions. I want something because I want it, because somebody else has it, and I want it because they shouldn't have it because I want it. That is the course of all liberal forms of government. They all lead to tyranny. Hitler got voted into office. I mean, Stalin. I mean, it's just.
I think what the classical liberals would say. I heard talk show host Michael Medved say that that election in Germany was rigged. And
oh my gosh! Well, yes, because elections have never been rigged in America. Okay.
Well, see, that's my point. That's my point. It's like, well, okay, but you still got a system there that's putting him in power. You could say it's rigged, but these things have been rigged all over the world. I mean, listen, again.
Show me a republic and I'll show you a rigged election. I bet $1,000.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's quite amazing. I think, listen, again, we got to be delicate here, but coming off some questions in the American election here, one of the things I'm hearing now, because the political right is absolutely dispirited right now. They know there's issues with the system itself. And you know, they're still clinging on to hopes of the next election, right? That's why they tell us go out there and vote harder. You got to vote harder, kind of a thing. But you know, Julian, it's a situation where people just they don't know anything else. They have trouble conceiving another form of governance. And listen, I don't tell people to vote or not to vote. Listen, I had over at the Knights of Christendom, I had Mike on from Restoring the Faith, and he's totally opted out of the voting thing. He says it's
Right.
all rigged, and by voting we actually support the system. That's not my take. I still vote because I believe, listen, we're Americans, how we do things, right? I don't want to go through the I guess a world where we're collapsing because we're allowing people to come in. But I think there is an argument there to be had that the system itself always lends it to the left. The question is, how do we confront it? What do we do at this point in history? Because what classical liberals are now telling me, understanding that they don't trust the system anymore, is that we have to go out there and continue to vote. And if the left is going to steal these elections, so be it. Let them know that they were not elected by the will of the people. If they steal it, we will make them steal it, and never will we submit. Force them to steal it so they in their hearts know that this is all illegitimate.
Well, I think what it really comes down to, this voting harder, is that people don't want to face the fact that if I really truly look into all of these voting irregularities, all of these rigged elections around the world, whether it's third world or first world, industrial, not industrial, America, there's recall in California, it don't matter. It means that this system is not perfect. It never will be perfect. And that maybe this isn't a system that should be used all around the world.
Okay.
It makes
Okay.
people, people don't want to have to think about that, because then that means that they're wrong and everything that they've been taught is wrong. And
yes.
that's a scary place to be, because that really, at the end of the day, is a true revelation. That is like, if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, taking the pill and waking up in this vat, and it's just like, where am I? Wait, so the world is destroyed and my whole entire life I've been living in a computer simulation? That is what it is like. If you were to really think about the whole concept of voting.
Right. Well, I think, Julian, you brought up a great analogy about the Catholic confessional booth and voting. In that respect, I think voting has been viewed by many Americans as a sacrament, right?
Oh, yes.
This is why we talk about this abstract, indifferent God, the God bless America God, as I like to say in many respects, that God blesses us through, I guess, the democratic vote, and democracy is part of the system. We've been raised that way, to believe that the vote is sacrosanct, that it's our rightful duty, and it's holy, and it's precious, and it must be preserved in sort of its most purest form. And this is why I think, as we see elections with lots of questions in them, and I believe American elections have been having problems for a long time. I think specifically in the inner cities where far left is dominating, that's been going on for decades. That's the interesting thing about it, in my opinion. But I think, listen, I've had Catholic friends of mine tell me, Frank, America will never be a Catholic nation. You will never have your Catholic confessionals nation. Accept what we have and work what we have, Julian. That's what fellow Catholics have told me.
Well, that's because fellow Catholics are wanting to, one, get scraps at the table that they're no longer getting. Two, they've been told by the hierarchy and by American society not to evangelize. And Americans, Catholics specifically in America, have failed to evangelize this country.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, they have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been going on, and it's been going on long before the Second Vatican Council. I mean, even though Leo the 13th, Blessed Leo the 13th, gave us the encyclical and defined and proclaimed Americanism as a heresy, it really was in my historical estimation a little too late, because American Catholics have really just, they've dropped the ball
Okay.
in wanting to evangelize this country. That's
Well,
why they're not going to. That's why we're not going to vote ourselves a confessional state. The only way we're going to vote ourselves a confessional state is if everybody in the state is Catholic, and then they all vote, because all the people in government are Catholic, and they're just like, well, yeah, everybody's Catholic. Let's make it official, y'all.
so there you have it there. Okay, Julie, to close this thing out, again, voting in America, I partake of it. I do still. And mainly because I have my questions about democracy. I'm highly skeptical of it at this point in history. And I think there's a lot of good reasons to be highly skeptical of it. But at heart, I am an American. I do love this country, despite all of its problems that I've pointed out. It's home. It's the country I was born in. It's the country that's taken care of me, protected me to a certain extent. I've raised a family here, and I'm going to die here. And so in that sense, I have a stake in it, and that's why I continue to vote, even though I'm highly skeptical. What about for you, Julian? Do you still vote, and do you still see any merits in it?
I've never really been too keen on voting. I voted in this last election. I voted in the national election 3 times, even though I've been able to vote 4 times in the national election. And I don't think I've ever voted in any of the local elections.
Mm-hmm.
I find that you can be patriotic in other ways for your country than voting. Voting isn't the only way to being patriotic. There are other ways to save your country outside of voting.
Okay. Stop right there. Stop right there. Because I know people on the right that would look at you with great disdain and say, you're the problem. You're the reason why this country's falling apart. You're the reason why the Marxists are coming in, because you're not doing your part. Because in order to have a viable republic, we have to protect it from enemies without and within. And by opting out, you're allowing the enemies from within and without to conquer America.
Well, I mean, I think there's about 340 million, maybe 350 million people in this country. I think maybe 60 million, give or take, vote. And there's a huge population that can't vote for legal reasons, or they're underage. So, but the majority of people don't vote because they just don't want to vote, because they're either skeptical, or they don't think it's useful, or they don't believe in it. There are lots of people who just don't vote because I think what Republicans don't seem to understand, people really don't care about politics. I care about politics. You care about politics. These people on the right who are all on those talk shows care about politics. It's your life. It's your hobby. It's your everything, whatever. But at the end of the day, people don't care about politics.
And I'll tell you why.
I think that's overlooked. That just human nature. They forget the human element. We're dealing with people here, and majority of people, they just don't care. They're going to live their lives and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, Julian, very well said. And I'll close it up by saying this. You're absolutely right. The majority of people don't care. You know why? Because they're too busy trying to raise families. They're too busy in this usury system, trying to pay a mortgage and trying to pay their taxes and trying to pay their health care. There's just more in life than to worry about politics every day. And then at the end of the day, what does one vote matter anyway, said individual, right? It's like I told you
Right.
before, I voted my whole life in this system, and I've never had a representative ever represent my values, okay? For a lot of people, voting is really non-existent. It doesn't matter. It doesn't apply to them because they never see any practical application to their lives. It's the political system has gone one way. We have powers that be that cut deals in the dark of night when most Americans are sleeping anyways. That's why I believe people have lost the faith in the system, and it's a faith that's starting to, well, not only crumble, but a skepticism, I should say, that's starting to spread all over America. This is why we have the problems that we do. Julie, my friend, I want to thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Frank. I want to once again thank my friend Julian DeMarco of the vlog site May He Reign. Please check out his site. I'll put the link in the description. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.